Hi everyone, and welcome back to Geektube Central and our Season 6 reviews for Game of Thrones in this episode called Oathbreaker. Now, I'm going to break it down in sections, and it's not going to be in the order that it was shown. I'm just breaking it down into each section. And we'll go into our first section, which will be Daenerys in Westeros. Overall, with an episode name like Oathbreaker, you're wondering, how does that relate? Now, I think you can interpret it a lot of ways, but I think the main reason for the episode's title is to do with Jon Snow. But first and foremost, let's start. I'm going to go from least juicy, interesting parts to the most interesting parts, and you'll see where that's going. In the first section, we're going to go over Daenerys. So continuing on with Daenerys' storyline, Khal Morro and his Blood Riders and the massive amounts of his Khalasar take her to Westeros. And the whole point is they're going to take her to the Dosh Khaleen, where she's supposed to be in their eyes. Now, as much as they go on about you're the Great Khaleesi, and after your husband's dead you're supposed to go with the Dosh Khaleen, there's a bit where she's walking, as you can see, and one of the Blood Riders kicks her in the bum and says, well, come on, Great Khaleesi, move your arse. And it just made me think, I know women don't have the same sort of status, and it's very old style, but I wonder if they would have treated her this way if she had been born a Dothraki and not a Westerner from, Westeros and even being Valyrian. And the fact is she's seen as a strange sort of Khaleesi because of the silver hair and her pale skin. I mean, they mentioned it in the previous episodes, the Red Women, where they talk about how pale they are, and even after she's been announced to be a Khaleesi, I still don't get, they're following the tradition that she has to come to the Dosh Khaleen. It's not like they really care about her, and obviously this is the first time she's been back in quite a long time, and inside this sort of the main building here that you see that they're walking up into, that's where she did the ceremony where she ate the stallion's heart, and how that was when the Dosh Khaleen would prophesy that she was going to have the stallion that mounted the world, As she comes in, no sooner is she in, and it's like Khal Morro greets her just before she goes in, and he says, "Welcome home, Khaleesi." And you're thinking, this isn't home, and she really is like a needle in a haystack. She doesn't belong in it, and she actually sticks out like a sore thumb, and she's brought in, and obviously maybe she's thinking about how it was a happier time, and even though she didn't like the whole eating the heart thing, it sort of felt like me that she just sort of put up with the traditions because she loved Khal Drogo. And now that she's back, she's realising, I don't belong here, and I'm sticking out. And no sooner have the Blood Riders basically dumped her in front of the Dosh Khaleen. The other, what I would call the minor Dosh Khaleens, because there was a senior version of it that you'll see in one of the pictures, they literally rip off her clothes, and obviously Daenerys is totally affronted by this. And I know some people have been talking about the fact that, Emilia Clarke isn't showing as much nudity as she used to. My theory on that is that the character herself, when she was showing nudity, it was to do with the fact that she was this vulnerable person, and the nakedness led into her vulnerableness in the first season. And remember, when we first saw her naked, she was being made naked and vulnerable by her brother, which was disturbing. Then there was the whole being naked when she was basically having her first intercourse with her husband Khal Drogo, and then the happy sort of nakedness. And I don't care if I see Emilia Clarke's breasts, right? I really don't. We've seen enough of it. It is not to do with the storyline. I hope people don't lose the plot over it. But anyway, this senior Dosh Khaleen, after they've stripped her and took off that lovely dragon sort of half necklace off her, she wears this leathery kind of outfit. She says, I'm the Great Queen, and I'm the Khaleesi, and I'm the Queen of Meereen and Mother of Dragons. And she is all fire and blood, and she is empowered by what she's gained since she was last here, but also how she lost a lot to get to that point. And there's the point where that Dosh Khaleen that you see here, she says, I was the wife, the Khaleesi of a great Carl. At the end of the day, when your husband dies, you're supposed to come here, and you didn't come here like you were supposed to. And although the Khalasars are here to discuss which places they're going to raid and who they're going to take captive as slave, now we're going to have to talk about you, the silver-haired Khaleesi of Khal Drogo. I'm kind of thinking that yes, if she was supposed to come back like they said, but at the end of the day, she really doesn't really fit in, and she is different to the other Khaleesi's. I kind of get the feeling that even though she was married to Khal Drogo, no one really liked her, and no one really thought that she was worthy of that status because she was an outsider, and I just think that they were always going to be quite negative towards Daenerys, and the fact that she says, well, let's hope the Khalasar let you stay here and you'll be safe, but you just know Daenerys was never going to do that, and I kind of wish that Daenerys would at least pretend to be going along with it. And then, so the Dosh Khaleen woman is basically saying, you know, you should have came here earlier, and because you haven't came here earlier, you're probably going to get in trouble because they're going to decide your fate. And at this point, remember, Daenerys isn't going to let anybody decide her fate. Not since her brother, and since her husband was taken away from her, and I believe that Khal Drogo would have went with Daenerys and he would have conquered Westeros, but he would have done that for her, and that's how it shows that how different Daenerys is, that she actually encouraged her husband to do something outside the box. At this point, she's just biding her time, and although it's not a really great scene, it's more of a filler scene to gear up to the next episode, because we only see this one scene, and I think quite rightly she's gonna still be defiant to all these Dothraki because she's not gonna take any crap from them. And it's not just because they're Dothraki and they're seen as kind of stubborn, kind of women-hating, they're not really very positive to her strength. She's just biding her time, and whether she's rescued by Daario Naharis and Ser Jorah or Drogon, as it's been alluded to, she's going to get out there and she's not going to be one of the Dosh Khaleen. That's what I think is going to happen anyway. So we're back in Meereen, and although we've no Dany there, what I really like about this next scene is that it's Varys centric, and I like that it actually takes part in the throne room and that he's not just sitting on the chair. I always thought, you know, maybe if he was by himself he might have more political assignations to be more of a power player than he's been before, but actually I love that even without her being there, without Daenerys being there, Varys is just working it. And he's speaking to this woman who's obviously she was involved with a lot of the Unsullied and the Second Sons being murdered, and he knows about it. He knows everything about her, and even when he first says her name, which is Vala, I love the sound of the music changed, and it was this forebodingness, and you're like, yeah, he's got your number, bitch. Pardon my language. And he basically says, you know, you've been involved in all this and that's quite serious and you know what's going to happen, and he mentions that he knows everything that she's been doing, and she tries to hold her ground by saying, well, the Second Sons and the Unsullied, they're just foreign soldiers, as if to say that it doesn't mean anything and that she was defending her city from these interlopers. But Varys, quite rightly, he manages to twist it where she becomes someone that's very antagonistic towards him, very steely, to where he sort of reels her in, and he kind of turns someone else's traitor, someone else's little bird, and he's turned her to be his kind of little bird in the end, because he makes her sing. He makes her admit that it's the masters of Yunkai, Astapor, and the really big slavers in Volantis that are behind this whole thing, and he manages to get her to confess and give him all the information, and in return he's helped her, give her a big bag of silver coins to take her and her son Dom, who Varys has found out isn't very well, so he uses things against her, but rather than have her be someone that he would just execute afterwards, he is kind of honourable in that he's actually turned someone for the good. He didn't need to threaten with violence, he didn't need to torture her. In the end, when you realise Varys might be unassuming and might not be, and I know Tyrion keeps going on about how he's missing a cock and everything, but that guy has mega balls. The next scene afterwards though, although it's okay, it's just basically Tyrion, and he's obviously drinking as he usually is, and he's just trying to speak to Grey Worm and Missandei, and it just isn't coming because they're not drinkers and they're not really conversationalists, and I kind of wish that we'd had more scenes or even an update about the dragons and if they're eating again. He mumbles on about, you know, let's have a little funny game, and you realise that games for them aren't really something they'll enjoy, and thankfully Varys comes in and admits to Tyrion, I've got information, the slavers are all grouping together in the other cities and they're basically the ones that are killing and trying to turn Meereen back to how it was. And that's when Varys mentions that he can get his little birds to send messages out to him. And we've heard this from season 1 about Varys' little birds and all that kind of stuff because he was the Master of Whispers. But you're kind of always wondering, is it actual birds? Is he sending birds with messages, or is birds a term for something? And it's in the next scene in King's Landing that you realise that birds are his little messengers and they're children. Now, I don't know if it's the same sort of thing here in Meereen, but I kind of get the feeling that once Varys has someone or has his little group of birds, they're loyal to him regardless of who's in power, who's fighting in the War of the Five Kings. They are loyal to Varys, and I know his reach is different now that he's kind of exiled from Westeros, but I actually believe that all the little birds that he's collected, and that all this influence and spreading of messages and getting the whispers, that has not stopped because he has left King's Landing in Westeros. I still believe that maybe these little birds, even the previous little birds that are in Westeros, which you find out are children, he still very much has a lot of pokers in the fire, and he's still got influence, and it doesn't matter that he's halfway around the world. And I think this scene, although it's kind of been a bit lacking for Tyrion, that I wish there was more for Tyrion to do and say in the scene, it really goes to show you how important Varys is, and how really he is this linchpin that will keep Meereen safe, and as much as they can keep it safe. Now they're considering using what Missandei and Grey Worm kind of alluded to, that the only way to protect Meereen is to get back at the people that are behind the Sons of the Harpy, and that's with violence. But obviously with Varys there, he doesn't use violence as his main weapon, and I think that's what we might see in the next episodes. So we cut across to King's Landing again, and this theme of the little birds for Varys continues on, and that you see that these little birds that Varys had in King's Landing were children, and that they were very loyal to him, and you're seeing Qyburn trying to turn them to be his little birds, and he tries to, in his own way, with his skills being a maester, he helps a little boy with an affliction. He's obviously helped her mother, and he's sort of getting them to come into his bosom that way. And he even brings these very precious candied plums that he's going to use as a kind of payment method. And Cersei and Jaime with the mountain come down, and he says to her, you know, we've got these little birds, and she's like, I want you to find out more than just what's happening in King's Landing. I want you to look from Dorne to Highgarden and up in the north. I want to know everything about anybody that's going to basically be talking shit about me. I just want to know everything. And you get the feeling that, yeah, you can see Cersei and Jaime, that Lannister's getting their own strength with these little birds. But then they come up to the small council meeting, and even though Kevin Lannister's their uncle, it doesn't even feel like they're on the same page. They're not, even though they're related. He doesn't actually like them being there at the small council meeting, and you see that he's obviously not going to help them get any sort of power through the small council. When they ingratiate themselves and sit down actually at the table, and there's a funny moment when Master Pycelle is basically slagging off the mountain and talking about how he's an abomination and that he should be killed. And when he turns around and he actually sees that the mountain is actually there, he actually farts, and you can hear it's quite an audible little fart. You're actually going, did he really just fart? Or did he follow through and shit himself? But what I think that these scenes in King's Landing are a tale of two different types of power. You see that Cersei and Jaime are getting more power from the little birds and the Master of Whispers, that he is an actual member of the small council, although the small council don't like him at all. They're getting these connections through the little birds, but they have no connection in the small council, because in the end all the members of the small council, they get up and leave. and they're sitting at a table with no small council, and it seems like they're being shut out of one area, but their other area is strengthening, and they can see the power in those little whispers from the little birds. And Cersei's like, I don't want it just to be local gossip and local whispers, because you would think that they would only really care about what's happening in King's Landing, but obviously, even though that is the actual capital and the power place, that there's much more to be known. And I think Cersei's finally thinking about the bigger picture, about what's happening in the other regions of the Seven Kingdoms. And I think, although it was a really good taster of seeing Cersei come back from her shame walk and being all depressed and obviously losing her daughter, you can see that she's trying to build up her own power base. And I'm so looking forward to when she actually enacts something, because she's not really used to being so laid back and in the shadows and biding her time. She's much more of an action sort of person, whether or not it's a good action that she does. I actually want to see her be more physical and more making things happen than just sitting in the background and soaking up sort of any information. And they bring up this whole thing that Jaime just says, why don't we just get Clegane to go and crush the High Sparrow's head? But Cersei, she says, don't worry, we'll have our moment with someone else, you know, basically alluding to it's going to be a trial by combat. She says, you know, it's going to be really good. And I think that's what she's building up to. She's biding her time, getting as much information as she can, and when the High Sparrow finally decides to pull up the charges against Cersei in a trial, she's going to choose trial by combat, because she's got the Mountain, who everybody in King's Landing are afraid of, because one, he's a zombie, but two, he's not totally without any memory or any higher functions, because we saw from last week that he managed all on his own to kill that guy that was slagging off Cersei and talking about her when he was seeing her on her shame walk. He is capable of being the dog that he's always been, because that was their relationship between the Lannisters and the Cleganes, is that they were like the muscle behind the money and the power of the Lannisters. And you can see that they're gearing up to Clegane using his main strength, and she believes that he's going to win for her and that everybody's going to know it. So this next scene, still in King's Landing, is with Tommen and the High Sparrow, and it starts off kind of positive, like with the continuing theme that he wants to be stronger and show them who's boss because he's the king, and he comes in demanding that the High Sparrow let his mother Cersei see Myrcella's tomb. And as strong as it starts off, and you think, yeah, Tommen's finally grown a pair and he's using his kingly powers, the High Sparrow manages to talk him down and turn it round to the point that he's sitting next to him, and Tommen is really doing the opposite of what Cersei is wanting to do, which is regain power and show everybody who's boss. And although he started with that, it just goes to show you that if he isn't with someone and he's by himself, even though the Kingsguard are right in the corner of the room, he's just really manipulatable, and he's manipulated by the High Sparrow, because the High Sparrow starts to talk about how, yes, your mother, she did her atonement walk, but she hasn't, fully made up for her sins, and that isn't in my hands, it's in the God's hands, and you should be thankful, because even though she has to go through all this, she's a very strong mother, and it's just like the mother from the Seven, and you can see it ends with Tommen's face, and he gives this sort of little smile back to the Sparrow, and you're like, stupid idiot! All the power that Cersei and that are trying to get with the small council trying to get back at those that killed Myrcella, the Sand Snakes, and how this Dorne is being took over, none of that is being held by the small council, because they're all basically focusing on getting Marjorie out, because obviously Lady Olenna was there, and Mace Tyrell is the Master of Coin, and they've got an uphill battle with that, but they still have strength, and you believe that they might not get it done now, but they will. And Tommen, you just know that he's just a puppet, and if he's going to be manipulated, it's better that he's manipulated by someone that does actually care for him, aka his mother and Jaime. Now in this section we're going to cover the Starks, and the first Stark we're going to look at is Arya. And as we've left her, she's blind, right? But she's back in the House of Black and White, and although she's back there, she's still being beaten the everlasting crap out of by the waif. But this time, with the exception is who's the girl, and she says no one. She asks Arya about her list, and she mentions her list, and she tells her to talk about her family. And there's a part where she says about the hound, and she says, well, the hound isn't on the list, and it just alludes to the fact that she wanted him dead, but then she didn't want him dead. And I think this was, in a way, her being broken down to sort of get the last little vestiges of what was left of her being Stark. So after she's parried with the waif for a while, and finally she gets the upper hand on the waif, which is unusual, Jaqen H'ghar speaks to her and he says, if you tell me your name, your actual name, then you'll get your sight back. Now what I like is when he comes to her, she's kneeling beneath one of the different emblems of gods, and it was the weirwood tree, sort of symbol statue kind of thing on the wall. And when she takes the water, now remember this poison water, if she drunk it and she wasn't being true about her answer, she would have died and just been another one of the bodies that's cleaned up. But miraculously she opens her eyes and she has her sight back. Now I believe that she has given up on being Arya, but I don't think it's totally gone. So when she says she's no one, I think she believes it, but I still believe that she's not just going to give up being Arya Stark. She's going to use what she's being taught and trained in the House of Black and White, and she's going to come back and she's going to finish off that list with Needle that is out back in amongst the rocks where she placed it. So we're back in the north, and as you can see, I've highlighted here that the Umbers from the Last Hearth, they travel down towards Winterfell, and you actually see their banners come in, and they're taking an audience with Ramsay. Now Ramsay for the first time is now not a side person. He's the Lord of Winterfell and the Warden in the north, and he's sitting at the table with Stark as his now side man, and he takes an audience with Small Jon Umber. Now he comes saying, you know, I'm Jon Snow is bringing the wildlings, and we're always going to have to deal with the wildlings, but we're not going to be able to do it, we need more help. And Ramsay's like, well, if you want me to help you, you know, you should pledge fealty to us, because you wouldn't pledge fealty when my father was in charge. And he says, your father was a cunt and I wouldn't do that anyway. And even though he's coming here kind of cap in hand wanting help, he refuses to swear fealty because he doesn't believe that it means much, you know, towards Ramsay and everything. And it's true, it doesn't mean anything to swear fealty, because, you know, they'll stab you in the back at a later point. And he even says, you know, considering you killed your father, and he says, Ramsay's like, no, I didn't kill my father, it was the enemies that poisoned him. And he says, whatever man, you killed your father, I know it, you know it. It would have went on like this, like a measuring dicks and figuring out who's got the bigger one, when he says, I've got a gift for you, and he brings forth two hooded people, and as it turns out, it's Rickon Stark and Osha the Wildling. You can see that they look kind of confused to where they are, because it's obviously they've been blindfolded the whole way. And this whole Oathbreaker part is to do with, they were supposed to be really loyal bannermans to the Starks, and in the end they obviously broke this oath because they're offering up Rickon Stark to Ramsay. And as proof, because obviously Ramsay believes that two brothers, Bran and Rickon, have been dead and dead for a long time, they produce the head of Shaggy Dog on this horrible big hook. Now, there's two opinions. Some people think that the reason why he won't swear fealty is because he doesn't believe that if he swears fealty, because they're probably honourable, they know they're going to break it, basically turn traitor on Ramsay, because really they've always been on the Stark side. And that the wolf head is probably another dire wolf, because there are dire wolves in that far north, and it's probably not Shaggy Dog. Now, I obviously hope it isn't. A lot of people are kind of upset and think that hopefully Shaggy Dog isn't dead at all, and that head looks a bit small, but I know that the actor that plays Rickon, and his name's Art, I can't remember his second name, and he says no, Shaggy Dog is dead, and that is the right colouring for Shaggy Dog. But one thing I want to take note of is, compared to all the dire wolves, and that's including Robb's Grey Wind and Ghosts for Jon Snow and Nymeria and Lady and Summer, Shaggy Dog was the wildest. And I actually think that he looks a lot bigger. I remember the last time he was with Summer, when he was with Bran, he looked a lot bigger and fuller in the face than Summer does, and he was quite a fierce and the most untamed kind of wolf. And I like to think that if that is Shaggy Dog, he fought really hard to protect Rickon. And I'm just going to hope that nothing bad or horrendously bad is going to happen to Rickon, but I wouldn't take bets on it. I remember I said in the last episode that I thought that maybe they were going to bring Theon to Ramsay Bolton, and now it didn't happen. It wasn't Theon, it's Rickon and Osha. Now, Osha's a smart chick, right? And she's managed to escape and take Rickon and Bran away before, and I think the fact that Osha is with Rickon is a good thing, because I don't know why they would need to bring the wildling girl with them to prove that it's Rickon. They really only needed the head of Shaggy Dog. But there you have it. If we're going by what it is, Rickon and Osha are now prisoners. Ramsay's got a shit-eating grin, and he mockingly says, "Welcome home, Lord Stark." Which means he's just gave up one plaything, aka Sansa, for a new one, and I hope that isn't going to happen because he's just a kid. I don't want him to get hurt or anything like that. So here we are, back beyond the wall to do with Bran. Now this is penultimate scenes I'm covering, and what I absolutely loved with it, there's no preamble, it actually starts in the flashback. You see Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven, they're kind of a bit further away, and then they kind of move closer, and you can see how even though Bran in his own mind has been told the stories of it, he's completely enthralled by it, seeing it as it was and how it happened. And it cuts to Ned Stark, who is fantastic. Being able to see Ned Stark in any incarnation is fantastic, and he's got 5 other bannermen, including Howland Reed, which is Meera and Jojen's father. And there's very little preamble in talk. Ned alludes to the fact that King Aerys and Rhaegar at this point are both dead, and why weren't they with him? And they're like, we were told to stay here and we're staying here, but if we had been there, we would have killed Robert, the usurper. And we see Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and that's his sword Dawn, and you can only vaguely see it, but there's actually a symbol on the handle to allude to the name of Dawn. And Sir Gerald Hightower, who's on the left, is actually the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, and he's actually mentioned earlier in the King's Landing scenes, because when they were talking about who would be allowed to go at a small council meeting, obviously there was a precedent for the Lord Commander, and that relates to that. And it's kind of funny that you actually hear about Gerald Hightower and then you see him in this scene. And when they start the fighting, Howland Reed actually goes down first. When he's down, he's moaning and groaning. He's not dead, which I kind of thought when you see him down on the ground. He looked pretty badly injured. And Sir Gerald Hightower gets a good look in and he totally runs through one of Ned's bannermen. But really quickly afterwards, he's dispatched by Ned, and this is what I'm going to show you right here. And the way I'm kind of disappointed, because I know Sir Arthur Dayne is a fantastic knight, but I didn't think that Gerald Hightower would be dispatched so quick, and it seemed like even though he was the Lord Commander, he seemed like the side man to Sir Arthur Dayne. But Sir Arthur Dayne was amazing. He's two-handed with the swords. He has Dawn in his right hand and another sword in his left, and he quickly starts dispatching all of Ned's bannermen until it's just him and Ned. And as they're fighting, you can see that Ned is not the upper hand, and Sir Arthur Dayne's really giving it really good fighting moves. And I was a bit disappointed with how they cut the scene, because one minute he was fighting Sir Arthur Dayne, then it cuts to him kind of being off balance, he attacks Sir Gerald and kills him, and then he comes back to fighting Sir Arthur Dayne. And he was can I just say, Sir Arthur Dayne was definitely the star in this. He really was. Him and Ned were the ones to really watch. Hearing Ned talk was amazing, to see him younger and those mannerisms, but there's also kind of innocence about Ned that you can see. He hasn't been, obviously what's happened since this point, he becomes more the Ned we remember. But in the scene, he's up against Sir Arthur Dayne, and Arthur Dayne is winning, and he actually disarms Ned, and it's just like he's waiting for Sir Arthur to come in and do him in. And then just right then, Howland Reed must have jumped up from where he was lying, and he had a dagger and he stabbed him through the back of the neck. And what was quite disheartening was how gurgly and bloody, and you could tell that it was quite traumatic, an immortal wound, but he wasn't going to die quick. If he'd been left the way he was, he probably would have took a few minutes to die, he would have drowned in his own blood. But you can see Ned, and what's funny is when Sir Arthur Dayne gets down on his knees after he's been injured, then the sword falls forward, and the hilt and the handle are facing Ned, and Ned, seeing the sort of pain and the suffering, he picked up Dawn and he sliced him across the throat, and it dispatches him much quicker, and in a way that's, in my mind, it was more of a mercy, because he didn't want him to die. Someone so noble, although he died and Ned was saved, because Howland Reed saving him I don't think is dishonourable. I think that he just wanted to protect his lord, and he probably thought he was on the way out, and he tried to help. And a matter of fact, he did, and it was a mortal wound, but Ned, being the honourable man that he was never going to let him suffer, and that's why he slit his throat. Because when Sir Arthur Dane was killing people, he was methodical. He ran them through. There was at one point where he crossed both his swords and sliced one of Ned's bannermen's throat, and so he exsanguinated fairly quickly. So when he killed those bannermen, they died quickly. Whereas Ned, obviously he did not give the killing blow or the mortal blow, but he wasn't going to leave him like that. After that, you hear a scream and you look up at the window, and even it's funny, both Bran and Ned look up at the window, and obviously he goes to run to try and get to his sister. And at this point, the three-eyed raven, who should be known as Vision Blocker at this point, he decides that it's time to go, that he's seen enough, and Bran's like, no, I want to, I'm not going to go through all this, I want to know what's happening, I want to go inside. And when Ned runs up the stairs and he's kind of being pulled emotionally, Bran is, by the three-eyed raven to stay and not follow Ned, Bran shouts father, and at that point Ned turns round. Now let's think it this way, did he turn round because, like the three-eyed raven said, oh, it was probably the wind? No, he heard his sister screaming in agony and pain, right? He was not going to stop. So the fact that he turned round immediately after Bran shouted father, I do think that he actually heard Bran, although you saw from his perspective that he didn't see anybody else there, even though from Bran's perspective he was standing at the point where Ned was looking at. And at this point Bran's being kind of canny, and again he tries to move away from the three-eyed raven and try and go up against his wishes, but obviously the three-eyed raven counteracted this, was in front of him and pulled him out, and that leads to my whole flashback interruptus. Now I think it was really good. It was just enough to get you enticed to see this, to actually see Ned for the first time in years in a flashback, even as a younger self, was a very good gift for us, considering we only had one flashback last season. So of course we're more emotionally invested and we want to stay with Ned, and even when he pulls Bran out, Bran says, why didn't you let me stay? And of course Three-Eyed Raven says, I can't let you stay, it's dangerous. And Bran at this point, I suppose it's kind of like, although the Three-Eyed Raven said the ink is already dry, it's already happened, you can't influence it, I think secretly he thinks that there's something more in Bran that maybe he hasn't got, and he's managed to catch that attention of Ned. I think also it's probably a blood thing, maybe because he's related to Ned, and that's maybe why Ned might have heard him. It might have been that kind of connection. As much as what I love next is you see Bran really frustrated, saying, why did you have to take me? I wanted to stay there. Couldn't you have just left me? I would have been happy there. Instead I'm come back here and I have no legs and I'm stuck with you, and I don't want to be like you. I don't want to be stuck in a tree. This is the first time that the Three-Eyed Raven actually states categorically, you're not going to stay here. You're not going to be stuck inside a tree for 1,000 years. But you have to learn things, and you haven't learned it all yet. And once you've learned everything, in his words, he's going to send you obviously out, and that he's going to have this information to help fight in the Great Wars to come with the White Walkers and the Whites and everything like that. And I also think he needs him to see more of the past, and it might open up to how and why the Three-Eyed Raven is important, because I believe that when he says you need to know more pivotal flashbacks that might go back further. So after the first initial flashback in Winterfell when they're children, but before the Tower of Joy, I think they're going to do something with the Mad King. Overall, this flashback was amazing, but of course a lot of people are going, oh, but I wanted more. It's episode 3. You're not going to get everything. It's a balancing act, and they can't give you everything at once because it would be too busy. I wish the fighting scene was a bit longer and a bit tighter, and the cuts between Ned fighting Gerald Hightower and Arthur Dane was a bit cleaner, but that's just a niggle for me. So here we are at the penultimate end of the review, and we're back at Castle Black in the Wall. And obviously we're dealing with Jon Snow's resurrection and this whole aftermath to do with it. And what I like is it very much centres on sound and like this visual of Jon's face as he's obviously gasping for life, and he's releasing all that darkness from death, and he's becoming more pink and fleshy, and I thought it was really interesting. And you see Sir Davos seeing Jon breathing and coming back to life, and when he looks down at himself and sees those stab marks, you can obviously see that he's completely, utterly distressed. It's real, it's happened, he really was murdered, I definitely did die, but why am I here? I shouldn't be here. And he actually says that to Sir Davos, and Sir Davos, I thought it was really sweet, he wraps the cloak like a blanket around him, and we're dealing with that, and Sir Davos just says it how it is, you know, he says, completely fucking mad that you're back, but you are. Melisandre, obviously, who's been very shaken by her faith and her powers and everything, and she sees that he's back, and at first she's completely stunned, and then she gets a bit overbearing, and she's like, tell us, what did you see, and he's like, I didn't see anything. That's obviously disheartening, but the Lord of Light brought you back for a reason. I thought Stannis was the prince that was promised, but obviously he's not, but someone is. And she's obviously alluding to the fact that he probably is. He gets cleaned up, and I like that he actually flings his old vest that has the stab marks on it onto the table where he was dead, and he's refashioned up to look like the Lord Commander as we remember him. And he comes out into the courtyard, and there's a mixture of wildlings and the Watch. And when he comes out and he's walking through the courtyard, they're not saying anything. I thought there'd be audible gasps or oh my god or nothing like that, and they all just peel away from him to watch him as he moves through them. And he comes up against Tormund Giantsbane, and he's like, they think you're a god. And Jon at this point is very stoic and is like, I'm not a god. And he gets embraced by Tormund, and the fact that he feels pain, it just goes to show you that, yeah, he might be back, but he's still feeling those wounds. And Tormund says, well, it's alright, I know you're not a god, you've got a tiny pecker. And I like that Jon laughs, and you really need this levity, because obviously we're dealing with a lot of stress and a lot of darkness since he's been dead and now back alive. And when he embraces, he just walks straight up to Dolorous Edd and hugs him, and there's a funny thing, and remember, Dolorous Edd is called Dolorous Edd because he's quite dour, and he says to him, well, at least you look alright, you've got brown eyes and everything. And Jon says, well, at least you don't have to burn me. And I remember you see Dolorous actually laugh, and he's like, well, are you sure you're Jon Snow? You know, this sense of humour type thing. And it's a nice levity we need. The next section I'm only including with a little one picture. It's nice to see Sam and Gilly, and what you notice, the disparity between the fact that probably Sam's been on a ship and Gilly's never been on one, and she's fine and she's looking out at the rough seas, and Sam is just puking his guts out. And I thought that was quite funny, and you see that Gilly's just like she's so wondrous and everything, that even though she's on this old boat heading through a storm, she's totally happy to be there. And that's when Sam drops basically his intentions and says, I'm not taking you to the Citadel in Old Town because you're not allowed, women aren't allowed. And quite rightly she counters with the fact that, well, I was allowed in Castle Black, and he says, that's different, I had Jon and I had Master Aemon. Now I don't know if at some point is the news going to filter down to Sam about what happened with Jon being basically betrayed and killed but brought back, but Sam basically states it plain. He says, I can't have you in the Citadel, that's something I just can't do, but you know what, I care about you, you're my family, and I'm going to take you somewhere. He says Horn Hill. Now this is the one thing I have about it, is the reason why he was in the Watch in the first place is because he was the heir to his father, to his father's estates and title and everything, and the Tarly name and everything, but his father didn't see him as his heir, and he says, join the Night's Watch or basically I'm going to have you done away with. But Sam seems to be confident in the fact that he can take them to Horn Hill and everything will be fine. So we cut back to Castle Black, and there's a distinct change in ooh and ah, and he's back from the dead, and he's all business. He has Sir Alistair Thorne, Ollie, Bowen Marsh, and Otho Yarwick, and they're all on, got a noose around their neck, they're standing on the barrels, and he goes along them and they say their last words, but the most important one was being Sir Alistair, and Sir Alistair is unrepentant to the last, even with a noose around his neck at the lowest point just before death. He is completely in control, he's unrepentant, and he says, you know what, I did it for the Watch, and if I had my time to do it again, I pray that I would have the strength and I would do it again. But you know what, you're going to be fighting this for the rest of your life. And Jon seems to be resolute with that, and he takes his words. And you turn to Ollie, and Ollie's got this look on his face. Pure anger, spite, vitriol, bile, whatever you want to call it. And I actually thought he was going to spit in Jon's face, but he didn't. There was a soft look on Jon's face for like a millisecond, and then he turns his back, and you see that the method of execution is cutting the rope. And he pulls out Longclaw, but he doesn't do it straight away. And there's a moment where you're thinking maybe he won't do it, maybe he'll turn round and look at Ollie again. But then there's a change in his face that I was very conscious of the look on his face. There was sort of like this plain look in his face, and then he scrunched up his face like he smelt something disgusting. He obviously reaffirmed in his mind that he's going to do this, and he cuts the rope. And you turn around and you see them and hear them gasping and flailing of limbs. And then there's a backwards shot that you see here where they're just swaying and they're dead. And their faces are of someone that you expect from being strangled. Their eyes are bulging. Their eyes are bloodshot from the petechia, from being strangled. And Jon goes over to Dolorous Ed and he hands him his cloak. And obviously Ed is like, "What's this for?" And he says, "Keep it or burn it. Castle Black is now yours." And obviously, Ed's thrown for a loop. Jon carries on down the stairs from the scaffold, walks through the crowd and leaves through an exit, and he says, "My watch is ended." Now there you have it. You're kinda, at first when he carried out the sentence, like obviously he was the Lord Commander doing that, and he had the final say, and he carried out the execution because, like his father said, Ned, if you believe that's his father or not, he said, he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. And in the end he did, and they ended up dying. And it's like, at first I thought maybe this is just going to change the way he's going to be running things, maybe he's going to be proactive, but no, it was like his last hurrah. He took off his vestige that made him the Lord Commander, that identity of being a crow, and when he said what we all suspected that he was going to do, because the whole point of the vows was that you make your vows and when you die, that's when your watch ends. And he's obviously took that as literal. I died for the watch. Now that I'm back, I'm no longer beholden to this oath. And that is what I really enjoy about that finality of that moment. He's definitely not in the watch anymore. And that just leads to more questions like, what the hell is he going to do now? Two trains of thought. He's going to go and muster up with help probably from the wildlings to bring back to recapture Winterfell. Or he's going to do what I think he needs to do, is to seek revenge and collect what is left or what he can find of his family and regroup. And finally, I think we're going to see more, because Sansa's freed and has an ally in Brienne and Pod, and now you see that Jon is free from the Watch. I'm hoping they're going to meet up, because remember, Sansa's on her way to the Wall to find Jon, and he's leaving it. I just hope they don't miss each other. I hope there is a moment where he actually sees some family and there's some happiness within the Starks. Now, obviously, there's some questions that I'd like to have resolved. What I'd really like to know, because we're into the third episode now, one question is, will Sam ever find out what happened to Jon, or will that be just pushed aside and it won't even make it to him? And Sir Davos, obviously he's came to some sort of conclusion and amicable sort of relationship with Melisandre, but bear in mind, nobody's mentioned to him yet that Shireen Baratheon is dead, and dead because of her. And is he ever going to find that out? I really hope it does, because as much as Melisandre bringing back Jon is a great thing, it really doesn't wash and wipe out the fact that she's done horrible things in the name of the Lord of Light, and I hope that she's held to account for that, because she was a lovely character, Shireen Baratheon. So overall, this episode had a lot of meat on its bones, if you get my drift, and the flashback for me was a highlight, and obviously the Jon Snow scenes were a highlight. Kind of the lowlights is that we're 3 episodes in, and I'm still yet to see Cersei and Jaime really rank up the revenge part. Now, although Cersei is not my favourite character, I believe that this plotline for her is going to be fantastic, and it's going to be exciting to watch her style of revenge. I know the Dornish storyline has not been well received amongst the fans and everything, but I still want to see what happens in Dorne, and I kind of don't want Ilaria Sand and the Sand Snakes to go, unopposed. I hope that there's some sort of inner rebellion from maybe a newer characters that might be a really good balm against their storyline to kind of make the storyline more exciting and fresher. The characters themselves have really not made the impact I thought they would. The Arya storyline finally feels like we might get somewhere. I don't know if she's truly a faceless man yet, but there's obviously more to see in that regards. And bear in mind, we've only had 3 episodes, and there's been a lot of, developments, a lot of sudden and quick deaths, and now that Rickon's a hostage, I just hope that, considering there's another 7 episodes, and I just hope it doesn't turn out bad for him, because I think that's going to be the straw that breaks this camel's back, because I could not bear to see anything bad happen to Rickon. Bear in mind, Osh is there, she's a smart chick, she managed to get around Theon when he was the one that was holding them captive in Winterfell, and she will get them out. Now, they may not have Shaggy Dog, whether or not that actually is Shaggy Dog. I believe that she is a strong ally there, and she's going to protect him like a wolf protecting her cubs. So, final analysis, episode wise, out of 10, I would give it a solid 9. There's room for improvement because there was sort of filler sort of clips with the whole Sam and Gilly. We didn't really get anywhere with the King's Landing scenes. So I think there's more to add, but I was overall happy with the episode, and I can't wait to see more Daenerys scenes, particularly with the Dothraki. I want to apologise for how late this review is coming out. Sorry, this virus is just not shifting and I have the worst cough and my throat is killing me. But thanks for bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed the review. Like, comment, subscribe, tell us all about what you think, and if you think I'm wrong, because I'm perfectly happy with hearing everybody's feedback on it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.